Service accounts are ripe for abuse in Active Directory. It's one of the things that we probably compromise the most in the context of like accounts, you know? And a service account really, the way I describe it is just it's an account that's used for some sort of automation or a task or scheduled job. It's not something that is typically used by a human or an IT admin to like interactively log in with. And it's oftentimes forgot about, and nobody knows what it's for. They're often left there, and because of tribal knowledge and people leaving the organization, a lot of times these service accounts get kind of set by the wayside and forgotten about, and then that's how you end up with some technical debt and these accounts being having weak passwords and all sorts of stuff that we're going to dig into more in this episode. So before we get started, Tyler, what's kind of like your biggest what's your biggest risk when you see service accounts? Like, what's the most common thing you're looking for? And then we'll get into some more specifics of like what makes them dangerous.
Whenever I see service accounts, obviously Kerberoasting is just a free way to get, hash of that account's password. And after we Kerberoast, we're not just looking for service accounts that are in administrative groups. We Kerberoast all service accounts. And I have an interesting story about that I can tell here in a minute. But once we Kerberoast those accounts, then we're trying to crack the passwords. So load up Hashcat and then try and crack the passwords. And it's a very, very quick and easy win because Kerberoasting does not take very long. I guess the longest part would be cracking hashes. But still, to get an elevated level of access from such an easy technique to abuse versus some of the others that we see in Active Directory, service accounts are definitely one of my favorite avenues of attack.
Yeah, and Kerberoasting is heavily used by ransomware groups. It's a very common technique to get access to privileged accounts, service accounts, administrative accounts, and unfortunately, many times IT admins create service accounts that are used interactively for like daily IT admin use, or they inadvertently set up or configure services or SQL databases or things like that with their domain admin account. Or even worse, we've seen service built-in administrative accounts be service accounts as well, which is a big no-no. But we've kind of seen it all when it comes to service accounts. So we're going to dig into, in the rest of this episode, we're going to talk about what makes them dangerous. We're going to share some stories about real life internal pen tests, how they're abused, and then we're going to talk about kind of mitigations, what we think you should do or could do to mitigate account compromise of these service accounts, how to protect them, and that kind of thing. So before we get started on the rest of that, quick shout out to Secure IT 360. They're the ones who kind of produce this podcast. They support it, and we wouldn't be anywhere without them, so to speak. So if you're interested in a pen test, if you need a pen test, especially internal, because that's the best, right? I'm not biased at all. Go check us out at securit360.com. We'd love to talk to you about your next pen test. So what makes a service account dangerous? So I'm going to tee this off, and then I want you to share the story that you have, Tyler, about a recent pen test. So one of the reasons why service accounts are dangerous is because many times they're overprivileged. Many times they're a member of the domain admins group or some built-in administrative group. Many times they have local admin on servers. They might be used to run SQL databases. Service accounts, kind of by their nature, are very privileged in Active Directory. And to kind of articulate where this can kind of go wrong, Tyler, why don't you share the story about a recent pen test we had?
I was on an internal pen test, and I looked in the domain admins group, and I took note of, kind of their administrative name format, and then also the names of the administrators that were in that group, just as kind of an antidote to put in my head to take further into the engagement. And later that day, I Kerberoasted probably 12 or 15 accounts, took those offline, formatted them, and then was cracking hashes. And one of the service accounts that I ended up cracking a hash for, I looked at, and its name The only difference between its name and then one of the administrators in the environment's name was SVC underscore. So that was present at the front for the service account, not for the domain administrator. So I'm kind of sitting here and I'm like, well, these look very, very similar. What are the odds? What are the odds that these accounts have the same password? Instead of just trying it for the domain admin, I sprayed it across the environment. Obviously, I want to get a wide net search, see, is this in use for any other service accounts or users in the environment? And then I got the domain admin off of that. They were using the same password for this service account that was not administrative for the administrative user. And I think that's the first time I've seen that on one of my pen tests, but I wouldn't say it's something that's uncommon. Not sure how many times you've run into that, but that was definitely probably one of the more fun engagements, just finding these little Easter eggs like that.
Yeah, it's very common for service accounts to reuse passwords, right, between service accounts and even between administrative accounts. And it's just, for lack of a better word, it's out of laziness, right? Not wanting to have unique passwords for each account, being able to remember them easily. But that is a very big, it's a very big risk reusing passwords, because if one of those accounts gets compromised, if a service gets compromised, if a database gets compromised or a web application, you have underlying service accounts that are running behind those and they get compromised, they could then use, an attacker could then use those to discover other accounts, right? So the shared credential kind of situation is fairly common. The other issue with service accounts and what makes them dangerous is they're quite broad in their access. So like I mentioned a few minutes ago, many times they are given local admin on servers. So it's very common to see, we see this a lot with law firms, right? Like they have Equitrack or they have Copatrack. They have these different solutions that are network-based. They run on the network. You install them on your environment, but they run across the network. So multiple services, multiple departments even need to access them. So they give them broad access on a number of different servers because they have to run certain things. Well, if you compromise that account, well, now you have local admin or administrative rights in some way across a number of different servers. So this broad access issue is also very common with service accounts. And I don't know if you've seen this too, Tyler, but this path is very common, from cracking a service account to getting local admin on a server to then, compromising something else like a scheduled task that's running as a domain admin. Like that's a very typical path.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like the other problem with service accounts is because there's more scrutiny around them, just in the industry as a whole, they typically have better password policies than your regular users. That's kind of a double-edged sword, though. The better the password assigned to the account, the more likely that password is going to get written down somewhere, or that password is going to be in plain text somewhere that we can enumerate and see. And I feel like that holds very true for service accounts. The other thing that we typically see with service account password policies, their passwords never expire. And I understand why. Some organizations, it's a set it and forget it type of account. It does X, Y, and Z thing. The password never changes. So the account always does its task without fail. So from that standpoint, maybe a password that doesn't expire makes sense. However, you do run the risk of that password getting compromised or being written down somewhere 6 years ago, right, and being forgotten about, and then that password still being true when a threat actor gets in your environment and now they're running as that service account.
Exactly. And, that's one of the reasons why people don't change service account passwords, is because they fear that it's going to break things. They fear that it's going to interrupt critical business operations, and the fear, is warranted, obviously. They don't want to take down their environment because they changed the password. The other reason why folks don't change their service account passwords is because they don't know where that account is being used, or they don't know everywhere that account is being used. So we'll get into more of mitigation and kind of like how to control this risk in a little bit. But the other place that we kind of abuse service accounts from, or we actually kind of identify service accounts from, is file shares, document repositories, document management systems, wikis, ticketing systems, SharePoint, in application configuration files like web configs, all sorts of places where either IT admins or developers or end users, vendors store credentials. And this is a very common location to find service accounts during internal pen tests because, like I said, one web.config file could have like a SQL account that's running SQL services across all of your SQL servers. And more often than not, that account probably has a local admin on all those servers. And if you have those web configs out on a file share that's readable by all users, I could potentially discover them, find that credential, use that credential, and kind of pivot my way through the environment.
Yeah, and I would say that's one of the most common scenarios that we see on internal pen tests. I have a specific PowerShell script that I've written that looks for .config files, web.config files, because it's so common for us to see all these servers sitting out there that we have, file share access to, that we can read these files from, and they're very fruitful across multiple engagements. So I would definitely make sure that you guys are checking those if you haven't already.
For sure. And it's one of those things that is kind of a hidden risk. Many times when we highlight the risks of file shares, it's like, well, the file share permissions are misconfigured and like everyone has full control or can modify it. And that's a risk, certainly, especially if you have like sensitive company data and you're not backing it up properly. If somebody like either accidentally deletes it or a ransomware actor gets on there and encrypts everything, you're kind of in a bad day, gonna have a bad day kind of thing. But the hidden risk of that is actually just allowing everyone to read everything. I know it's difficult to restrict that and lock everything down based on least privilege and all that, but that really does go a long way in reducing kind of the recon attack surface, if we can call it that, meaning I'm a threat actor on the environment. If I can read all of the file shares, it's only a matter of time, really, before I find something that's useful. If I can read everything and everything's wide open, it's just a matter of time before I find a password or a web config file with a credential in it or something. And it also allows me to kind of exist in the environment, persist in the environment, kind of under the radar, right? Like I don't have to do a lot of crazy stuff to look through the file shares or look through SharePoint or document repositories, right? It's not very noisy in most environments. So I can persist in the environment very much. And sooner or later, we'll probably find a service account cred or something that leads to it as a result of that.
Yeah, and sometimes these credentials on file shares are not easy to find, and sometimes we just happen across them. Recursively searching through your file shares for service account names could be a good way to identify where they're at, but sometimes that's not even how we're finding them. Sometimes I think a good scenario that I can come up with is a .eml file that I opened that had images inside of it that I was able to pull a service count and then its password from, because they're just highlighted, and then there's text box assigned on that image that tell you the information that you need. So some of these things are hard to find, which is why the more restrictive your file shares are, the less recon opportunities we have as threat actors in that environment.
Yeah, and no amount of automation is going to find that. Now, I know people are going to be like, well, AI, you could like OCR the image and read it all, but like, yeah, do that at scale across all of your file shares and like OCR all of your images and like just there's some things that you just have like intuition on and you have like the pen tester spidey sense, I described this to Mike Lisi when I was on his podcast recently, which should come out sometime in the future. But I was like, it's kind of a spidey sense. If you've been doing this for a while, you kind of get a sense of what is maybe suspicious or what kind of your intuition is telling you to poke at and look at kind of things. And there's many cases where that has happened for us during internal pen tests that has led to credentials, service accounts, admin accounts, etc. So let's talk about mitigating the risk for a little bit. And we'll use the rest of the time to kind of talk about service account mitigations, control, hardening, that kind of thing. So the first thing I want to call out, and it's something I mentioned a few minutes ago, is like many IT admins don't change the password for their service accounts because they don't know everywhere that account is being used, right? So step number one is like figure out where that account is being used. It seems so simple and obvious, but it's actually can be quite difficult depending on your environment, the size and the amount of teams that you have. But that's step number one. Identify where those service accounts are being used and write that down. Document it, right? This account is used for X, Y, and Z. It's used on these servers. It's running these tasks, or it's running these services, whatever it is. Identify it, document it. That's step number one.
Yeah, the next thing, quick story. I've had 3 engagements this year where the enterprise RID 500 administrator account is a service account. And this brings up the point of check your service accounts. See if they are necessary. See if they are still being used after you do an inventory of them. If they are not in use or the use case is not worthy of a service account, it doesn't fit, within that realm, remove it. And you remove risk in doing that because every service account is a quick and easy win for attackers and us alike. So the less service accounts you have, the less total footprint you have that's very easy to abuse. So do an inventory of those accounts, the accounts that aren't in use or don't need to be service accounts, remove.
Exactly. The RID 500, the built-in domain administrator account should never be a service account, ever. There's no reason for it, ever. Same with domain admins. Like there should never be a domain admin service account. And I know people are going to say, well, Veeam and, this and that. And it's like, well, I understand. I empathize. It's difficult to go least privilege, especially with like backup software, critical services. But if at all possible, don't allow your service accounts to be that highly privileged. So that's the third step, really, is remove privileges, strip out security groups, restrict access, and especially logon rights. Because service accounts typically don't need interactive logon, right? They run as a service. So they need like run as a service or run as batch. So you can give those privileges, but you want to restrict interactive logon so that if I, as an attacker, compromise that credential, I can't just use it to like RDP into the domain controller or the SQL server or whatever, right? It just makes it a little bit more difficult to use it. So remove privileges, think of least privilege, zero trust, and remove access, especially logon rights for those service accounts wherever possible to restrict kind of the lateral movement, blast radius, if you will, should those accounts get compromised.
And then get a password vault. Some of the examples we're giving earlier, which we see, I would say 90% of our pen tests are just passwords on file shares in plain text. It's written down somewhere. And the longer the password policy in an environment, the more password files we're going to find. Humans are inherently weak when it comes to security, and remembering long, complex passwords is definitely an area that I see a lot of organizations struggle in. So get a solution that helps manage that. There's tons of password vaults out there. Give your IT staff specific access to that, and then assign privileged accounts in there so that if you need to know the password, only a select few people have access to those privileged accounts, and you can go grab those easily.
And that's another reason why service account passwords are reused, is because the IT team is not using a password manager or vault or a PAM solution. And these PAM solutions, they come in various degrees of capabilities. Like you can just get a password manager, just a password vault kind of thing. You can store it in there and that's good. Or there's other ones that have like really kind of compelling features, meaning you can check the password out. So like you can check out the credential and then it expires after, 30 minutes or an hour or whatever. And then once it expires, it automatically rotates the credential and rotates it everywhere it's used. There's solutions that do that. There's solutions where you can monitor sessions. So like if you have a service account that's running something over like SSH, some of these tools, you can monitor that SSH connection. So like you create the connection from the PAM solution, and then you can monitor what happened during that SSH connection. That's pretty cool. A lot of them, virtually all of them, have auditing built in. So you can see like who checked it out, who changed the password, who updated the information, etc. So there's an audit trail for it. So there's quite a bit of like quality of life and kind of security enhancements that these PAM tools offer. Of course, I would recommend starting out with just a simple vault. Like just start by creating a vault, locking it down, making every password long and unique. If you just start with that, like you were saying, Tyler, you mitigate a tremendous amount of the risk.
Yeah, another thing is create rules to fire alerts for these accounts. If none of your service accounts are supposed to log on interactively, throw an alert if a service account logs on interactively. Pull the event ID, key off of your service account naming format, and generate an alert. And that'll either tell you it's being misused internally or a threat actor is using it. I feel like both use cases are great to know from a security standpoint because that provides benefits for education and security.
Exactly. And I like to use the example of Suzy in accounting. If Suzy in accounting is all of a sudden using a service account to log into a SQL server, maybe that should be suspicious in your environment. Or maybe that service account is initiating a logon from Suzy's machine in accounting to a server or a DC or something like that. And maybe you're not able to put in like logon restrictions and like really lock down, technically where that account can log in. Maybe it will be easier to start out just monitoring for that suspicious activity, like you were just saying. Maybe that's an easier place for you to start as opposed to locking everything down. You know your environment best, but alerting on abnormal, suspicious behavior is part of what helps mitigate the risk of these accounts being compromised. The last thing is gMSAs or managed service accounts. Managed service accounts are great. There's a couple different varieties that you can use in Windows and Active Directory, but essentially a managed service account is a service account that's managed by Active Directory, meaning the password is managed in Active Directory, similar to like what people are familiar with LAPS, kind of the same deal. The password is managed in Active Directory. There's a policy for it. It'll rotate every certain amount of time, but you configure it on the service, and then you don't have to worry about it. It's all handled on the Active Directory side of things. And it's really great. It allows you to use long passwords, unique passwords, and it kind of removes a lot of the frustration of needing to manage that service account yourself. And there's additional protections built in to managed service accounts, which make it really a nice benefit if you're trying to like really lock down your environment. Harden Active Directory, managed service accounts is really a great way to go.
And I would say for anybody that's listening and you're thinking, okay, we can't remove privileges from these accounts right now. We need to do auditing XYZ. Please make sure you're enforcing at least 20 to 25 character passwords for your service accounts. I don't know how many times we have cracked passwords for these service accounts that are less than 15 characters. The longer and more complex those passwords are, the more likely they are to be written down. However, the more secure those accounts are going to be. So, get a solution, password vault, something, or just get a really smart guy on your team to remember all your passwords. That's what we have
just
solutions
hire
for.
an IT guy that's got a photographic memory. Problem solved.
And then, apply those strong passwords to those accounts. And in the interim, while you're doing auditing or figuring out how you can remove privileges, you at least have a little bit of safeguard with a strong password so that if these accounts are Kerberoasted, you have more time between initial attack and then compromise of that account's password.
Yep. And I will tell you, we have cracked 10, 15, 20 plus character passwords and passphrases. So this is not something that is theoretical. If you have a 20 character password and it's like a Bible verse or a popular song or something like that, that's a commonly used word or a landmark, it's very likely it could be cracked. So it's very important that you use a strong, long password and it's unique.
Because I think the word list that we're using, the one that I use in specific, it's a 180 gigabyte text file. And then we're adding rules to mutate words in these lists. So we end up with around 4 quadrillion permutations and different results that we can send against these, hash passwords. The odds of it getting cracked with 4 quadrillion permutations is substantially higher,
Yep.
shorter and less complex that password is.
And, there's a lot of talk about quantum computing and like breaking, modern encryption and stuff. But like I'm telling you guys, with a decent gaming computer, which is like what Tyler and I run for our internal pen tests, like we've got a beefy gaming computer with a bunch of RAM, a good CPU, like a great graphics card. We can crack 20 character passwords in short order, like, and you can even buy additional GPUs online. Like you can buy 8, 10, 20 GPUs, and then you can chuck a bunch of hashes at them and crack very significant hashes or passwords by doing that. So like there is getting to a point where 10, 15 character passwords that are weak, 20 character passwords that are weak, almost to the point where like they will be cracked. Like with enough GPU, you can spend a few $1,000, like depending on how serious a threat actor is, right? They very realistically could crack a majority of your passwords that your users are using.
And with modern solutions, threat actors don't even have to shell out a high dollar to get all this computing power. They can go rent GPUs and use them for the applications that they want and then spin them back down. So there's a lot of efficiencies that have been built in on the red teaming side of things, which is why the blue team needs to be even more vigilant in the length and complexity of passwords and also the privileges assigned to these accounts.
Yep. So before everybody goes, I want to share a couple like cleanup mistakes, right? We're like, okay, you're an IT guy, you're trying to clean up service accounts and kind of do the right thing. What are some of the gotchas that you're going to run into? The first thing is just disabling the account right away before you like check with anyone, right? Like, yes, it's a risk. Maybe the password was cracked in a pen test. Like you really want to clean it up, but I urge you to just slow down and take the time to check with people, take the time to document where that account's being used before you kind of go ham and start disabling or resetting passwords, right? So just, erring on the side of teamwork and communication and collaboration will save you quite a bit of headache. Because what's going to happen is you're going to rush out, disable that account, and then it's going to break something. And you're going to be like, shoot, it broke something. And then you're like, okay, I fixed that. And then you disable it again. And then you're like, oh, it broke this other thing, right? And then now you're playing whack-a-mole with the problem. Whereas if you just took the time to slow down, talk to other people on the team, maybe they know, somebody else knows where else that account's being used. So just slow down, work as a team, collaborate, communicate with other people, and do, tackle these changes more methodically or meticulously. The other thing is one mistake I've seen as a result of pen testing, right, is we find a service account, we crack it, and the IT admin will just like reset the password, and that's it. That's a mistake because what we said a few minutes ago, like you should look at the permissions and see, does that need to be a service account? Are there permissions we can remove? Is it overprivileged? We don't want to just reset the password and then call it a day if there's more we can do to kind of harden and restrict that account. And then the third thing is reviewing it once and never again, right? The worst thing you can do is, do an audit, like an Active Directory audit or a permission audit or account audit. And you do it once and you're like, I'm good, I don't have to do it again. And then everything after that happens after that, you kind of miss and forget about. And it causes a lot of mistakes and hiccups as a result.
And I have a story. I was talking to somebody that's in this business around $70 billion valuation. So we're talking very, very large enterprise environment. They get somebody on their identity team and they got asked by some administrator, somebody high in IT. They're like, hey, we need the password for the service account reset. They had no change management process for these changes, and they also had no documentation of where these accounts were being used and how they were implemented. So this guy gets on, changes the account's password, sends the updated password to this guy. And then the next thing that follows is a 10-hour troubleshooting call trying to figure out why 6, 7, 8 different things in Active Directory are all broken. Can't communicate from X device to Y device. I mean, it broke half the things in networking because it was a critical account that was used and leveraged in the environment for multiple tasks. And changing that one password without knowing where that account was being used broke a lot in the environment. So do the review on these accounts. I don't know, maybe quarterly, maybe once yearly, whatever works for your environment. But as changes are made to these accounts where they're used here and here, and they get more tasks on their list that they're being used for, definitely document it because it can bite you if you go and make these changes willy-nilly.
Yeah, and that's a good point, is to document those changes. Follow a good change management protocol. You know, it doesn't have to be like a whole like change advisory board and like all complicated and formal, but if you just document stuff somewhere like, hey, change the password for this account because of X, Y, and Z on this day, you know, some details about it. And then a year from now, 3 years from now, when you look back, you're like, why did this thing broke, right? What did we touch related to this? You can kind of go back and look and see like, oh, we changed the service account or we changed the permissions, and turns out we didn't realize it was broke until a year later. But just having that documentation is really valuable and useful when you're troubleshooting and figuring out issues later on. So I strongly recommend good documentation and kind of a good change control process to document that stuff. All right. So that's all the time we have for this episode. Appreciate everybody listening and or watching. If you enjoyed this episode, you can check us out at offsec.blog. That's where we post all of our podcasts and blogs and white papers and all that fun stuff. There's links to all of our socials there as well. And if you are in the market for a pen test, we'd love to work with you and show you how we do things a little bit differently. And you can check us out at secureIT360.com. And we'll see you in the next episode.